I want to introduce you to a wonderful verse from the Bible that a lot of people don't seem to know. It's tucked away in the Old Testament, deep within the ominous and rather complex book of Jeremiah. The verse is the third verse in the 33rd chapter, and has slowly become one of my favourite verses of the Bible. And it turns out it's one of Bono's as well. In fact, the verse cryptically makes it onto a second edition of one of U2's album covers, photoshopped onto a flight board with the band in Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, France. Here's the verse. Call to me, and I will answer you, and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know. Now, many people think that this verse is an encouraging verse about prayer in general. They take it as a verse saying that God is inviting us to give him a call, and he will answer. That's how I mistakenly read it for many years. However, Jeremiah 33:3 isn't really about all prayers. It's about one specific prayer. The reason so many of us misunderstand the verse is we don't read it in its original context. But when you bother to read it in its original context and see how it connects with the whole story of Jeremiah, and in fact, the whole story of the Bible, you begin to see that this verse is about one specific emergency call to God and his incredible response. When you see it in that context, truly becomes one of the most astonishing verses in all the scriptures. So let me give you a bit of a background to this verse and the context in which it finds itself in Jeremiah's book. Now, I know some of you find history as about as exciting as a librarian's conference, so I'll try to keep this as short as possible and as engaging as possible. The important thing to know is that Jeremiah was a preacher in perhaps the saddest and darkest days of Israel's history. He preached over 2,500 years ago. Now, for those of you who are a little historically challenged, that's well before Cleopatra, that famous queen of Egypt, and her Roman lover Mark Antony. It's well before Julius Caesar lived, that great general, or before Alexander the Great lived. It's even before those well-known ancient Greek philosophers lived. Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates all lived after Jeremiah. Jeremiah was born before all of them around 650 BC and became a prophet in his early 20s. Now, in the Old Testament, a prophet was a preacher who was directly commissioned and gifted by God to speak to his people on his behalf. The prophet's words were considered to be the very oracles of God. And Jeremiah was a prophet who preached during some of the bleakest days in Israel's history, when the Israelites were on the verge of being wiped off the face of the planet by their enemies. So allow me to explain briefly. This, well, currently at least, is the United Kingdom. It's made up of 4 countries: Wales, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, with one royal family and one ultimate government in one city, that is London. Likewise, Israel was once a united kingdom, made up of not 4 countries, but 12 tribes or clans, with one royal family and one government in its major city of Jerusalem. But when Solomon, the 3rd king of Israel, died, the clans of the north basically had a referendum, their own Brexit, if you like, and voted to leave the south. They split in 2, and the Israelites ended up being 2 kingdoms, with 2 royal families, 2 governments, and 2 capital cities. This ancient United Kingdom became a divided kingdom. Then about 70 years before Jeremiah was born, the people of the north were invaded and overrun by their ferocious enemies, the Assyrians, who were at the time the ancient Near East superpower of the day. They were famous for their chariots and perfecting the art of war. In fact, many of their famous stone reliefs celebrating their victories can be seen today on the ground floor of the British Museum. The northern clans were no match for the mighty Assyrians, and many Israelites died in battle. Those who survived were taken away into slavery. Soon thereafter, the Assyrians also tried to take the southern kingdom as well, which they largely did, but fell short of sacking the city of Jerusalem. So the southern kingdom managed to survive, but only just. So now there were just a few clans left in the south, and they struggled along for a while longer until Babylon, the new superpower of the Middle East, was now looming large on the doorstep of the southern kingdom, threatening to destroy all the villages and towns and cities of the southern kingdom, including the city of Jerusalem. That is when Jeremiah began his preaching. But more importantly for us is not what was going on around the people Jeremiah preached to, but what was going on inside of them. These were dark days for Jeremiah's fellow countrymen, mainly because just about everyone had abandoned their faith in God. They worshipped other pagan gods instead, even sacrificing, believe it or not, some of their own children to them. Injustice, crime, adultery, inequality, greed had poisoned the people Jeremiah ministered to. The monarchy, the priesthood, the rulers were all riddled with corruption, idolatry and depravity. The point is, these were really sad days. The book of Jeremiah is largely a collection of his sermons, and his message was mainly one of grief, warning, and an explanation of why God was allowing this to happen. His sermons are full of tears and sorrow as he urged his fellow countrymen to turn back to God. In fact, he's often been called the weeping prophet on account of his message and ministry. His sorrow is depicted beautifully in this stunning painting by Rembrandt. Jeremiah tearfully warned the southerners in multiple ways that they faced the same fate as the northerners if they didn't recommit themselves to God. But sadly, they didn't. Most of the people didn't listen to Jeremiah. In fact, at one point, Jeremiah was thrown in prison, and there were even attempts to have him assassinated. But he lived on to see the southern kingdom overrun by the Babylonians, the southern cities burned, and the city and temple of Jerusalem destroyed. The Babylonians took captive the remaining men and women and deported them into Babylon. But Jeremiah and some of his companions managed to escape capture and fled to Egypt. So this is the backstory to Jeremiah, and it's into the mix of these dark and terrible days comes our verse, one of the most beautiful verses in the Bible. Like a diamond sparkling in the black sand. In the midst of hundreds of verses about God's judgment, anger, wrath, warnings, God says to Jeremiah, go and tell the people this. Call to me, and I will answer you, and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know. When you read the verse in this context, you see something so special about it, and you'll see why I've chosen it as one of my farewell sermons. We can actually break it down into 3 simple sections. Call to me, and I will answer you, and I will tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know. Let's look at them one at a time. First of all, call to me. There are several things I would love you to see about these first 3 words, and the reason why I've chosen it for a farewell sermon. The first thing to note is it is God who invites the people to call him. This is one of the great themes of the Bible. That is, God is an invitational God. The Bible again and again tells us that the all-powerful, almighty, all-knowing God who made the universe personally invites us to give him a call, to come to him, to be near to him. He's a God who invites us to be friends with him again. He wants us to come over to his place and be with him forever. That means life isn't about one long spiritual pilgrimage in search of God. He's not hiding somewhere in the cosmos, playing some kind of game of cosmic hide and seek. But he's the one who's come looking, searching for us, inviting us to call to him, to come back to him. You see it all the way through the Bible, right from the very beginning, in the opening story of the Bible. After Adam and Eve disobey God and eat from the one tree they were forbidden to eat from, they hide from God in their shame, but it is God who comes looking for them. He comes searching, and he calls to Adam, "Where are you?" And he invites Adam to call back to him. It's a theme that then runs all the way through the Bible stories, right up to the person of Jesus in the New Testament. And then Jesus continues to tell us that God is an invitational God. That's why he has come in many ways. In several occasions in the Gospels, Jesus presented God as a king who is inviting us all to come and dine at his banquet, to come over to his crib and eat with him. God is an invitational God. Secondly, and I think this is extremely important, is that this invitation from God is actually all about being rescued. Do note that God doesn't say, "Call me," but "Call to me." In other words, call out to me, cry out to me, shout out to me. In its context, as we've seen, it's a call to be rescued in the midst of despair, when you need to be saved. It's like when a child is lost in a field or in a forest who calls out to a parent to be rescued. Or perhaps like a sailor who is lost at sea, calling out SOS. It's not simply an invitation for us to give God a call when we need to pass an exam or you want the perfect car space in the shopping mall. But in the context of Jeremiah's day, when things are so grim, when their enemies were bearing down on them, it was an invitation to call out to him. Cry out in the time of your trouble, your fear, your shame, your waywardness, and ask God to rescue you. It's an invitation for us to turn to God for his help, his forgiveness, and his mercy. And thirdly, I want you to see that the invitation is a very gracious one. God's invitation to call him becomes all the more striking when you see it within the context of Jeremiah's day. The invitation came when they least deserved it. It came when the remaining Israelites were clenching their fist against God, running amok, turning away from him, ignoring him and doing all sorts of terrible things. God still invited them to call to him when they didn't deserve it at all. That's one of the central messages of Christianity. The grace of God. That God still invites us and is willing to accept us when we come back to him, though none of us measure up. Even when we're full of greed, self-centeredness, corruption, immorality, and deserving of judgment, God still graciously offers us his phone number to call to him, to be rescued, to come back to him. I can perhaps illustrate all three of these things with a story. Max Lucado tells this story in his book, No Wonder They Call Him Saviour. It's the story of Christina, a teenage girl living with her mum in a small house in a poor village in Brazil. Her mother does the best she can as a single parent to raise Christina. But Christina doesn't always see eye to eye with her mum. Like any teenager, she's full of rebellion at times, doesn't want to do the household chores, and is envious of other friends she knows who live in the big city and have a much more exciting life. So Christina often finds herself walking to the edge of the city and dreaming of a better life, a more exciting life, without the rules of her mum, freedom as she sees it. So one day Christina gets up early and enacts on something she's been dreaming about for quite some time. She packs her things and heads off to the city, runs away from home. Her mother finds that the bedroom is empty. She knows Christina hasn't gone to school. She would never go to school that early, and has an educated guess on where Christina has gone. She is deeply worried for her daughter. Meanwhile, Christina meets up with a number of people, including one guy who is up to no good. He befriends her, shows her things that men like and how to make money quickly and easily. Christina can't think of any other way to make money than to prostitute herself. And so she ends up spiraling downward. She gets a place, all right, but it's not like home. And she ends up in the wrong crowd and selling her body in the night. She realizes she's made a big mistake, but feels too much shame to head home. Her mother, desperate to find her, gets all the money she has and starts to head to the big city to find her girl. But just before she hops on a bus to go to the city, she goes to a local store where there's one of those passport photo booths. And with all the money she has, she takes as many photos of her face as she can. And on every photo, she writes a message on the back. Then she takes off to the city and goes to every place she can think of where her daughter might be. Local cafes, bars, down alleyways notorious for street girls, stairwells, and everywhere she goes she plasters a picture of herself on the walls, on lampposts, wherever she can. One day Christina, pondering her own miserable life, walks down the stairs of a brothel, and there on the wall at the bottom of the staircase she sees a photo of her mother. She's absolutely stunned. What on earth is a photo of her mother doing here? She takes the photo off the wall as quickly as she can. She turns it over and reads the message on the back of the photo. And the message says this: whatever you've done, whatever you've become, please come home. Love, Mum. Christina bursts into tears with joy and heads home. That is very much the message of this verse. Call to me, come back to me, come home to me. Whatever you've done, whatever you've become, please come home. Love, God. The next part of this verse is even more amazing. God says, call to me and I will answer. He will answer. He'll pick up. When we call God, there's no dial tone. There's no, please leave a message after the beep and I'll get back to you shortly. You're not put on hold for 23 minutes. It's not like phoning BT or Sky internet service. He answers. Even when so many of us don't answer him when he calls us. When he shows up, we ignore him. We put him on hold. But when we call to him, he answers our calls. So there's two things here I'd love you to see. First of all, call to God to rescue you, to help you, be near you. If you call God for mercy and for him to sincerely save you, he himself picks up. That's marvellous. He's not like a president or a prime minister or a royal, where you'll only ever get through to a secretary or an administrator. He doesn't say, call to me and I'll have one of my angels get back to you. He says that he himself will answer. We each have a direct line to him if we want it, and he personally responds. That is truly amazing. Secondly, God is impartial. He accepts everyone. Whoever you are watching this video, whatever you've done, wherever you're at with God, he will answer you. Just as it was in Jeremiah's day, the invitation of God is for everyone who sincerely calls for him, and he will answer you. Just like Christina, no matter what you've done, no matter what you've become, no matter how far removed you are from church, from God, no matter if you've ignored him for decades, when you finally call to him in your shame, your sin, your poverty of spirit, your fear, your helplessness, please do know that God will answer you. He doesn't answer you based on your religiosity, your moral performance, your tax bracket, your skin colour, or how pure or clean your life is. When you sincerely call out to him to rescue you, he will answer you. God is impartial. Now, the last part of this verse is heavily loaded and takes some explaining, but this is why I love this verse so much and why I want to share it with you. It also tells us something about what his answer is. Not only does God invite you to call to him, and not only will he answer, but he will tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know. Now, what does this mean? What are these unsearchable things that we do not know that he will reveal to us? Interestingly, the word translated unsearchable here from the Hebrew can also be translated as hidden, incomprehensible, wondrous, and even walled up. So what will God tell us that is walled up and hidden, that's unsearchable for us and so unknown to us? What does this mean? Well, from as far back as we know in history and right through to this very moment in time, human beings have sought answers to our deepest questions. From Greek philosophers to Jewish prophets, from inquisitive seers to learned wise men, from poets to songwriters, from ancient professors to searching astronomers. We've been searching and looking for what life is all about, an explanation for our existence. What is the meaning to life? What is our purpose? Why are we here? How did we get here? And where are we going? If there really is a God, what's his ultimate plan or purpose for us? These questions and ideas were particularly prevalent in ancient Jewish thought. Wise scholars who searched through ancient texts, longing to know and decipher the very mind of God. And please don't think these are questions just for philosophers and the religiously inclined. These sort of questions ought to resonate with you personally, because they ought to be deep within each and every one of us. In fact, they are. I believe every single person has asked these questions, at least at some stage in their life. Certainly collective humankind has always been on a quest for meaning, trying to find out what's over there, up there, under there, around there, or just out there. It's not just reserved for those of us who are religiously inclined. Given I may not have long to live, I can now confess finally I have an inner geek that manifests itself whenever it comes to astronomy and space exploration. I'm totally captivated when the next NASA or SpaceX rocket takes off. I don't know much about the science behind it all, but I do know at the heart of just about all space exploration is the quest for meaning. It's not just the desire to boldly go where no man has gone before, but even science is driven by the desire to find answers to our biggest religious and philosophical questions. Bruce Tchaikovsky is a planetary scientist and director of a team within NASA's Astrobiology Institute. He's a very impressive individual. To date, he's been involved in every one of NASA's missions to Mars. When it comes to justifying NASA's motives for space exploration, he said this: "We're interested in the search for extrasolar planets because it tells us, is our solar system unique or common? We're interested in the possibility of life on Mars because it provides context for our understanding the value of life on Earth. By learning about the worlds around us, we are learning about ourselves." I totally relate to some of those things. This desire to look anywhere we can for answers to our biggest questions. Maybe it stems from the death of my mother when I was 7 years old. Or perhaps it comes from camping trips with my friends when I was a teenager, when we slept under the stars and stared into the night sky for hours on end. I can tell you it's certainly at the forefront of my mind now as I wrestle with life-threatening cancer. But whatever may trigger it for you, ultimately, I believe we all have a desire for these kind of answers. It's a desire that lies deep within every human heart, not just the religious among us. This verse is telling us that when we sincerely call to God for help, He will answer and reveal to us the very things we've been looking for. When we call to God in our despair, His answer is full of meaning and purpose and forgiveness. Again, this is another theme that runs through the Bible, that God is a God who delights in revelation, in revealing, unveiling, disclosing His great saving answer to us when we call to Him. It's something that we can't know or discover on our own. It cannot be found in human wisdom or by trying to find life on other planets, or soul-searching, or philosophical pondering, or sitting on a mountain in the lotus position. But it can only be revealed to us by God when we call out to Him. The thing is, He's happy, He delights to reveal it. So what is it? What is this great unsearchable answer? The things that we can't know on our own. What is this thing that is so wonderful? It is the message about Jesus that the Christians call the gospel, the good news. It's prophesied and prefigured in the Old Testament in multiple ways, but it's fully revealed and disclosed in the New. It's a message of incredible hope, good news of how God has offered to forgive us, save us, and rescue us through a person. The message is this: it's that there really is a God behind the universe, a grand designer, a master architect who brought about everything into existence for a purpose, including you and me. In fact, especially you and me. For this God is triune. He is Father, Son, and Spirit, which means He exists in a loving communal relationship. Behind this verse, we're seeing that God is highly relational, and we know that from other verses that there is love, unity, community, all within the Trinity, and He created us to be in a relationship with Him. But just like the people of Jeremiah's day, we've all rebelled against God in one way or another. We've all ignored Him, packed up our things, and run away from Him like Christina. You read the book of Jeremiah, and in parts it's just like reading one of today's newspapers. There's rebellion, crime, greed, corruption, violence, self-centeredness, materialism, racism, classism. It's all there over 2,500 years ago, and it's still going around today, no matter where we live in the world. Nothing's really changed in 2,500 years. But actually, read Jeremiah closely, and you'll discover it's not just like reading a modern-day newspaper. It's also like staring into a mirror. When you read it with open honesty, you begin to see the greed, corruption, and self-centeredness in your own heart. Yet despite our rebellion, despite our walking away from God and ignoring him, God graciously comes looking for us and invites us to call to him for forgiveness. And he forgives us not by forgetting our sin, but by dealing with it. The great unsearchable thing is that God would one day come into the world in person to show us his heart, his plans, his love, to reveal his will, but ultimately to die in our place. That he would in his own self absorb the wrath, the judgment we all deserve on our behalf, so that we could go home to be with him. Jesus said that he was the bread of life. And when he had the Last Supper with the disciples, he took bread and broke it in front of them and then gave it to his disciples, saying, "This is my body." The disciples didn't fully understand what was going on that night. They didn't understand what Jesus was saying and doing. Yet they ate with Jesus on that fateful night, but they didn't understand what was going on. And yet after the crucifixion on the Friday, he appeared to two of his followers on the Sunday on the road to Emmaus. They were totally perplexed about what had happened and confused about what was going on, that Jesus had died. But when Jesus resurrected, sat with them and took bread and broke it, they got it. They saw that God had come down to earth as one of us and was broken. The bread of life, Jesus, broke so that we could be mended. This is the great and unsearchable thing that God has revealed to us, is that God saw us as broken and we needed to be mended. So God came down and broke on our behalf. He has conquered death and was alive and inaugurated a whole new possibility of life and life everlasting when he rose on that first Easter Sunday. I love the way Luke tells us that the eyes of those two disciples were so profoundly opened the moment they saw the bread being broken. And they got it, that they ran a good 7 miles all the way back to Jerusalem to tell the others. God in person had told them the great and unsearchable things they could never know on their own. And that's what I'm doing now with you. It's like Morpheus in the film The Matrix, offering you the red pill to awaken you to what is going on in the world and how you fit in and what God has done for you and what God can offer you. I took that pill in a sense when I was in my mid-teens, and I was awakened to the very big plan of God, and it changed my life. And it's what frankly makes my cancer and my imminent death bearable, so much easier. I've seen God's long game. I see the bigger picture, and it brings me great peace and contentment that I'm loved and that Christ died for me and I'm forgiven and I can be in a relationship with God and I will be okay in the end. This is just a moment in a much, much bigger story. I'm not saying that God gives me all the answers. I don't know why particularly I have cancer at this time in my life, but I do see the bigger picture, and it brings great peace and contentment. I also think this is what Peter had in mind when he wrote to people suffering in the first century. In his first letter, in the first chapter, Peter explains the gospel, the good news, the great unsearchable master plan of God, and then goes on to say this: now concerning this salvation, this gospel, this master plan, the prophets who spoke of the grace that was to come to you searched intently and with the greatest care, trying to find out the time and circumstances to which the Spirit of Christ in them was pointing when he predicted the sufferings, the brokenness of the Messiah and the glories that would follow. It was revealed to them that they were not serving themselves but you when they spoke of the things that have now been told to you by those who have preached the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven. Even angels long to look into these things. I would invite you to take a Bible, if you can get your hands on one, and read just one of the Gospels, one of the 4 biographies on Jesus, and see for yourself. And hopefully you too will come to a place where you realize you've ignored God, walked away from him, that you're just like the people of Jeremiah's day, and that if you call to him in blatant, sincere honesty, in sorrow, in remorse, he will answer you, and he will reveal to you a great plan for your life and how Jesus can fulfill all your greatest needs and show you how you can be with him for all eternity. He will reveal to you great and unsearchable things you could never know on your own, just like he did with me. I hope you do that. God bless.